Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to our live roundtable today. This is actually a new series on TechStrong TV called AppSec Today. This is a live roundtable version of that, where we bring in guests, part of a panel to have a discussion. AppSec Today is really focused on just that, application security and so much of what's going on in the industry, as well as its practitioners or the vendor community, and what we are doing to both improve our application security and some of the challenges that go around that. I'm very pleased to have Mend.io, who is sponsoring AppSec today, and our members of our panel are from Mend. We appreciate them being with us, and very much thanks to the whole team, Maria and everyone at Mend, working with us, Mend.io, and sponsoring the show. So we're going to get into some really great topics and get some insights, not just from a technology perspective, but maybe some of the drivers and some of the challenges that we're all working on together to help solve. And we can share some information that will help each other. So with that, let's start out with a panel introduction. Rami, if you would introduce yourself first.
Sure. Thank you, Mitch. My name is Rami. I'm one of the founders of Mend.io and has served as its CEO since inception 12 years ago. I generally come from engineering background.
Excellent. Congratulations on building a successful company. And CEO is no small feat, as you know, right?
It's not that big a deal either.
Well, it's because you have a great team around you, and I say that with all genuineness. Jeff, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jeff Martin. I'm VP of Product at Mend. I've been here for ever, and really excited to be joining Ronnie, our CEO, and Arabella.
Fantastic. Arabella, you were called out. I was going to ask you as well to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Arabella Hallowell. I spent a couple of decades in the cybersecurity world and last two at Mend. I'm actually originally from the UK, but I've been here over a couple decades. That's here in the US. So I sound Australian, or you can decide what accent I have. I'm based in the Bay Area. Jeff's in Boston, and Rami is in Tel Aviv. So we have a follow the sun model where often like Rami's day is ending and mine's just beginning. So we're on 24/7 as well. So that benefits everyone. But yeah, glad to be here, and I'm excited for the discussion.
Yeah, but we have a pretty global audience, and if you would, everybody check in, just let us know where you're joining from today. I thought we would first start out with, and by the way, this isn't just about a few specific areas of AppSec. We're going to talk about a number of different topics, I think, on over variations of the show. But really, Arabella, I'd love to get your perspective on why is AppSec such a hot topic? It's really elevated not just in the developer community, not just in the security community, all the way to the boardroom and compliance and so many areas of our business. And it's top of mind, and there's some key drivers behind that. I'm curious about your perspective on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's one of the reasons why actually I'm here at Mend is because I think that we've really seen as the threat landscape has morphed over the past 2 decades. Can't believe I've been saying that. Really the threats have in many ways sort of leapt to the application layer. So you see that in many reports. I know Forrester did a pretty interesting report recently where it's very clear that software exploits within code, as well as even supply chain attacks, are the number one source that they see for attacks and breaches. And a decade or even less, it tended to be like web app and network security, and then even going back, it was on the desktop endpoint side. And it's no longer like phishing attacks and even your standard web exploits. It's really much more sophisticated, and I think it's why it's such a hot topic, as well as just we've seen overall from a societal perspective that almost every organization has become a technology company, And code is the basis of almost everything that we do, even oftentimes, at a very physical level, whether it's basic utilities, healthcare, how we consume everything. And so I think the fact that code is now not just something that engineers do, but we're all relying on as consumers, as humans, as parents, has kind of changed the perspective around application security. It's become much more fundamental.
Jump right in there.
Yeah,
Jeff,
I'll throw my 2 cents in.
Mhm.
Look, one of the biggest things, and I'll take the product viewpoint of this, you respond to what your customers want. The biggest reason companies have focused so much on cybersecurity, especially application security, is quite simply the people who buy their applications are demanding it. And we are all, as I'm sure Rami will back, in the business of meeting our customers' demands. So when they demand a secure application, we have to provide that and we have to prove that. And that's really one of the bigger drivers. And then there is always the internal need. You have to be secure yourself. You don't want to be susceptible to a ransomware attack like half the world seems to have been in the last year. But fundamentally, it's a customer-driven piece, whether that customer's internal in your board or whether it's external in the people buying your software.
Right. I think more than even anyone explicitly tell you that they need it, everyone assumes that you're securing your application, right? And if they find out that you don't, and the only way they are going to find out is that something goes horribly wrong, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And from time to time, from time to time, companies actually do get into that level of trouble. And then everyone around them says, okay, let's not be that, right? Let's not be the next example of a company going out of business because they were hacked. And I think that's the main driver why people would go and invest a lot and make sure that they are keeping their applications secure. And, even without anyone necessarily calling them up and telling them you have to secure your application.
Remember a CEO telling me as the CIO, keep us out of the Wall Street Journal.
Exactly.
It's now keep us out of all news, right? Because if you're a LastPass or SolarWind or whoever, and whoever the next company is that's going to have that kind of fun, we don't want to be there. But it's also it's loss of data, right? It's privacy of our customer data. It's internal intellectual property. People are compromising applications. Not just to damage our reputation, but there's value in that, in the data and control of our systems, right?
Yeah, for sure. So look, in many cases, there's actually direct theft of sometimes even money or Bitcoin or whatever currency is being handled by those systems. And many times you see people steal data and then make use of that data for whatever they wanted to. So you're absolutely right. There's a lot of direct damage on top of reputational damage. So both of those are very dangerous.
Especially just with all the privacy regulations now. I know somewhere in my background, I picked up a privacy specialty as well, but fundamentally, governments and customers are holding companies more and more accountable for the data that they protect. And the main way you protect your data is through the applications that use them. So your application has to be secure or your data is not secure.
I think well, just speaking from my own experience, there was a time where you hoped you've done enough, but you don't really know because you don't have the tools or technology or the processes, right? Before there was as much regulation or maybe the developers of the attack vector that they are now. I mean, even for phishing and things like that. Now, being proactive isn't just in response; it's in being proactive in your software and making sure that not only your software you're creating, but also software you're using, services you're using as part of your solution. It's really the entire stack, even though you may not control a big part of it.
All right. So look, I think the whole notion of application security to begin with is stemming from being preventative and not waiting to react. Because if something's gone wrong, then the price is already too high. And I think many people understand that. And so the whole point of securing an application while it's being developed is to prevent these problems from ever happening and not just mitigating them when they do.
I recently was talking to a CEO, not Rami, somebody else. And
you're talking to CEOs behind my back?
I am just, yeah.
That's
I'm
his
cheating on
job,
you.
I think. I'll bet it is.
But I was talking to somebody who said we view application security as cyber insurance. And I told him he was wrong, because insurance is there to mitigate problems once they happen. That's what you pay for. This is more preventative care. This is going to the dentist and getting your teeth cleaned so that you don't have, a huge dental bill. It's prevention. It's not insurance. And I think sometimes people lose track of that because they try to put it into other models. But security done correctly is preventative, and it's by design. It's not reactive, and it's not by accident.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, Jeff, and not for the first time, but I think that if you actually look at a lot of application security to date, there has been a lot of, not to be too negative, but box checking, right? Oh, our auditors say we have to do it, and it's compliance led, and I think that's actually why we've seen many organizations, large, small, sophisticated or not, often when you actually look at like key success metrics, they've been pretty light because they haven't really focused on how do you make in particular modern AppSec program effective. We can get into that in a little bit, but I think we've obviously seen here in the U.S., both from mostly from a federal, and most recently, some of the cybersecurity strategy that came from the Biden administration. I think they really are trying to make an effort to, raise the bar, raise the level, so people who are developing code are more accountable, as well as those who are receiving it start to ask more questions. As we've now started to ask more questions, even at the most basic level around, obviously this has been done with appliances here in the US for many, many years, but even around food and like what's in my food. And, I think we are getting to that level from a code perspective. But Jeff, I guess back to your point on making it proactive and making it preventative, I think that one of the issues has been that the way the application security, I'll call it tooling, has evolved, has often been very manual and very time consuming, and has left a lot of the engineering organization kind of figuring out it's too manual, it's too false positive-y. And they've really struggled. Anyway, I don't want us to talk too much about tooling, but I think many organizations, even mature ones, are struggling with how do we make an effective AppSec program in practice, particularly when they're very much relying on their development engineering teams, making sure they're scanning all the code or dealing with it proactively.
Look, especially with big companies, modernization is a problem, period. AppSec tends to lag behind other areas, but you guys know, we talk to customers all the time. How many of them are still trying to figure out how to adopt Agile or DevOps? They're only just getting to the point of really enabling the stuff that startups were doing 10 years ago. Because big companies, and most of our data and most of the applications we use are from big companies, move slowly. They don't transform quickly. And so they don't realize sometimes what the modern processes and the modern tools are even capable of. Never mind being able to leverage that. We do a lot of education of just what's possible, because these companies live 5 years, 10 years in the past and haven't really modernized. And I think one of the things that's forcing them to is this move to the cloud and more distributed ways of developing your applications, as well as, Arabella, to your point, big customers like the US federal government saying, I'm sorry, you have to have this minimum level if you want us to buy from you. So they're being forced to, and that's a very painful process, transformation in large companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things I've also seen as I've evolved more into this space, before I worked a lot more on network and also endpoint security, is some of the program metrics is still what I would call relatively basic, and it could be large organization, it could be across verticals, and it could even be what I would call like a modern organization. But when I look at sort of key metrics most AppSec owners have for success, they're relatively basic, right? How long is it going to take me to fix a critical vulnerability? And then what's the percentage of adoption of either my developers or of all the code that gets developed actually gets scanned for application security vulnerabilities and issues? And those are relatively basic metrics. And I think what's interesting, and I don't know if I can disclose them on live TV, but the actual sort of actual rates themselves are, to me, staggeringly low. I think that how long it takes people, the percentage of adoption, how people really are able to fix in practice is, I don't know if we do a report card, but it would be kind of C, like it wouldn't be a B plus, it would be more like C, like even like D's. And I think, again, like raising that bar is a really important need for everyone, right? Whether it's, it's not just enterprise organizations, it's, I think everyone needs to be involved to get that bar a lot higher than, everyone being a C or even a D doesn't make people feel good about how secure their code is.
All right. So follow up on that. I think a major challenge is actually going through this cultural change in your organization. Because if you look 10 or maybe even 5 years back, security people and engineering people wouldn't know about each other, wouldn't care about what the other one's doing. They wouldn't need each other to do their jobs, and would just go about their lives without ever thinking about the other. Whereas today, security people who want to address this issue of application security are very much reliant on the cooperation of the engineering department, and they have to learn to work together to a very intimate degree. They have to be able to partner in order to make any kind of progress in safeguarding the application. And I think that forces, more than even tooling or practices or policies, it needs to have people that are actually willing to work together to address this joint problem or have this joint goal to be able to reach together.
I think it's a really important point because, security for so long has been about kind of building the walls and the moats around things. And with cloud native, with modernization, applications are much more porous, right? Microservices and things like that look like a lot of small components talking over a network. It's not just something we can put a wrapper around. But to that end, one of the things, Robbie, that I've heard you say before, you talked about, software is more than just about writing software, right? It's about composing and creating that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? I'd love to hear you expand on that.
Sure. So again, back to Jeff's point on modernization, modern software today is a lot more composed or put together than it is developed directly. I think if you even poll developers, especially in larger organizations, you'll find that most of their time isn't even devoted to typing code on the keyboard. It's a lot more around, one, even just finding the right components, and two, integrating them in a way that makes sense and is streamlined and performs well and gets the job that the application they are working on needs to get done. And it's not just open source. A big chunk of it is open source, but it also has to do with the way modern software is architectured, with microservices and images that are sometimes even inner sourced, but you still don't know, you, the developer that is putting the application together, you don't really know what's in that image, regardless of where you got it from. It could be from someone inside your company. And these different components have varying levels of quality, governance, control, and security policy during the time of their inception. So now when you are composing them, it becomes very difficult to standardize on anything, and especially on the level of security, which I think was the main driver of everything we're seeing around SBOM and supply chain. All these initiatives are all trying to address that complexity of building modern software.
Maybe to be kind of controversial, but why not? We're on TV.
Go for it.
I think that again, just sort of like looking at the growth of open source and also the community of open source and where packages come from, there is a lot of I think some further conversation now with SBOM and like what is the future of SBOM, which is like what is the trustworthiness of some of the packages. So I know, again, not to date myself, but back in the day, malware kind of came from endpoints, right? Or like then sometimes there were other different vectors, but we're actually seeing that malware today actually comes from packages. There's malicious code in packages and you don't know it. Where's it been inserted by who? And I'm not trying to like fearmonger, so malware and packages, I'm really not. Malware and packages is just one component. There's also lots of other trustworthiness issues, but I think just in general there probably hasn't been as much oversight or understanding of like where do packages come from. And I know sort of an area near and dear to Men's heart because we do manage Renovate, which is a leading sort of dependency health open source community. Just like basics around, hey, if I upgrade to this version, like will it break things or not? A lot of developers actually really dependent on that. But I think from a security perspective, we haven't really inculcated those types of mechanisms and thinking into how we think about AppSec. So in other words, what I mean is developers think all day long, hey, if I make this update, is it going to break something? But from an AppSec perspective, we don't really think about, well, making sure that we basically narrow our attack surface by going to a more trustworthy version or the version that has just fewer issues. Some of them are security, some are quality. I think this goes back to Rami's point, which is, I think traditionally there's been a little bit more dissonance or separation between development and engineering teams and their sort of everyday practice of what they do, and then AppSec, and when they come in and think about, oh, we need to scan all our code, we need to think about different levels of vulnerabilities. Just basics like dependency health, I don't think has crossed into the mindset of the security teams. And that would actually kind of be a takeaway that I would even have, which is, you can do some basic things to be proactive, as Jeff was talking about, like better dependency health, and the whole tide rises, not just for an individual organization, but for everyone's code that they use. Anyway,
Yeah,
I think you've got any follow on from that, but
yeah, it's funny. I think I'm hungry because I have food analogies going through my head. You guys are, obviously you're both correct in all the points you raise. Look, applications are now food. They're recipes. I shove a bunch of ingredients together. I compose my application the same way I compose something I'm cooking. I have a bunch of ingredients. I put them in there. I do preparation. Maybe I figure out how to integrate them at the right time. But what I don't do is pay a lot of attention to how fresh my food is, and I assume it's safe. And that's how, to completely throw my analogy out the window, you get poisoned. If you don't look at the ingredients and make sure they're good, meaning they don't have a malicious intent actually shoved in there, you're just hoping that your ingredients are good. One of the best ways to make sure you serve healthy food is to use fresh food, right? A lot of people let their dependencies and their software age, right? You don't want a 5-year-old dependency in your application any more than you want 5-year-old meat in your stew. It's that bad. So that's my version of fear mongering, I guess. Do AppSec correctly or you'll get poisoned.
Unless it's wine, in which case it's okay.
Yeah,
Always
that's fine.
good. That's always good.
Right.
Big takeaway from this whole thing is wine makes everything better. There we go.
Yes, always. Well, I think that there's a lot of things that are really kind of connected about what we're talking about, and that is the interdependencies of all the components, elements that make up the software that we're delivering or putting into production or in the cloud or on-prem, wherever it might be. And those things don't change in a linear fashion, right? I mean, one package in a Python element of your application, that package might be updated in a little piece of code that's needed by a release that is part of a release that a developer's doing, may have serious implications if it has vulnerability or security issues. But it's really easy for the developer to say, well, hey, just update the package, Conda or whatever, update it on my system, update it and test, and poof, it's out there. And nobody realizes until, and that's just one of 1,000 or maybe tens of thousands of elements of what we know about as well as what we don't know about that's in our stack. So the complexity of this interdependency, I think, is really high. And that's in part what SBOM is trying to get to, but it can't be a manual process, right? It has to be a continuous, as the software is evolving, even if it's one little package. Or
I'll be controversial. It could totally be a manual process if you have unlimited money and unlimited time. Yeah, then it could totally be manual. Just throw lots of people.
Even the time it would take you to manually review your system is longer than it would to take to develop the next version.
So it's great. If you never release, you're fine.
I was going to say, that's so 90s, Jeff. That's so 90s.
Right. So the best way to not get hit by a car is to stay home, right? So if you never release your software, then you'll never get hacked.
It's the best way to start looking for a new job, right?
But yeah, I mean, I was being a little flippant,
look, but
it has to be automated.
Right, but to your point, actually, it's not all bad news in the sense that there is no direct correlation between the level of risk and the amount of effort required to fix the problem, right? Sometimes your worst nightmare can be very easily fixed within like 2 minutes of, like you said, upgrading a version or doing some, minor tweak to some configuration somewhere. So you can actually use that to your advantage, right? If you do have a good process and you do use automation, then you can leverage that in your triaging, right? You can make sure to take into account the effort required to fix problems when you prioritize them so that you make smart investments.
And I think this is where I'll bring back the point I made earlier, which is I think people don't realize how far tooling has come in that it can do things like detect your full SBOM for you, in that it can do things like identify risks and tell you, hey, this risk is easy to mitigate. Here's how to do it. And I don't think the processes have caught up to where the tooling is. So that's the kind of really nice news from my point of view is, hey, not only is all of this automatable, that stuff already exists. You just got to use it.
Say more why. I want to hear more why process hasn't caught up with tooling. What do you mean?
So a lot of these, let's just say, development methodologies that are actually in practice for major application vendors are still old. We talked earlier about throwing up it as a wall. Why does that wall exist? It's because before you physically shipped your software, you had 2 walls. You made sure that it was quality, and then you made sure it was safe. And then you would put it out in the world, and it would stay out in the world for 5 years. That's just no longer how it works. So the interconnectedness and the constant updating of applications, that requires a different process that means the wall between development and security has to come down. in the same way that the wall between development and QA came down many years ago. Because your software is a living, breathing thing. It's not static. It doesn't stay. It's connected to everything else, and it's constantly changing. So you can't use those same processes. And those processes are better enabled by modern tooling than the tooling we had 5 years ago.
And to your point, Jeff, it's the application and right the infrastructure, the services, the tool, the application infrastructure, the stack that you're running on in the cloud or in your prem. It's really all of it. It's not, one element of it can be secure, but if the rest isn't, there's your weak points.
Yeah, I mean, look, I love my analogies, but cloud infrastructure is a foundation to a house. You still got to build the house on top of it. And it doesn't really matter if the foundation is, secure if you build a cruddy house. If you use bad lumber, bad dependencies, if you don't pay attention to how you're building it. People like Google, Microsoft, and AWS can give you a secure cloud infrastructure. That doesn't do you any good if you're building a tin shack that's going to fall over.
So I think that what's interesting is Jeff, back to your point, I think just from a pure process perspective, many organizations just don't have those things implemented, particularly from a modern, I'll just call it app development perspective. And I see some things in the chat just around dependencies. The number of people who actually do have a open source, I guess, project or office or function is still actually really quite small. And then when it comes to, I'll call it sort of even mid-sized enterprises, if you just look at the number of security sort of people and teams, it's pretty low. And so I think that just overall, from a maturity perspective, many organizations don't even have, and again, not pushing, but it's not just about tooling. They don't have the tools to do whether it's custom code scanning or open source scanning, but they actually don't have the processes, and they haven't connected between their dev teams and the security teams to implement some of these things. So I was actually speaking with a large technology research organization, and they were saying that actual open source functions and what often it needs to actually roll out things like a full dependency kind of program, dependency health program, just isn't there. Yes, there are, I see some things in the chat. Yes, there are definitely tools that can automate a lot of those dependency updates or give you the information that you need. But if you don't have processes or to know how to do it, it becomes really difficult to actually implement.
It's fascinating to me just because we talk about process a lot. Tools to automatically update dependencies. They exist. We've got a great one. Highly recommend it. Renovate. But look, what's the first thing you need to make sure you're not introducing functional risk? Automated testing. If I update it, is my application automatically tested to make sure that I didn't introduce something functional? We can do things like mitigate that, tell you that this particular version has been used by other people and it's safe, and they aren't having problems. But the fact of the matter is, to participant 270's comment, people are afraid to touch these kinds of things. That's because other processes aren't enabling it. Things like automated testing to be able to say, did I introduce functional risk by remediating my security risk?
It brings up this person, he or she brings up, it's 270, the really good point of there's always with security of if you touch it, if you break it, you fix it, right? Well, you have to touch it to break it, right? Do I go there? Even in the security world, there were things like, do we really want to get into that? Because if we do, we're going to find stuff we're going to have to address. And I think we're at the point where, yeah, we know we have to do that, even if we are, fearful about what we might have to do once we dig into that. But part of it is just knowing, do I have enough visibility into it to know where to focus and then what to do? Because usually security is about, well, there's 1,000 things that we could potentially do. What's really important to do? And then, Ravi, like you've said before, it's all about fixing it, right? It's not about finding things. It's about getting work done.
Right.
I'm not going to. Oh, do you want to go?
No, just one sort of thought on that topic. which is to say that some of the most successful organizations that we've seen in the way that they handle application security risk is actually by segregating their sort of pre-existing situation, right? They have some backlog, okay, or existing security debt, which, you know, falls under the category of if it works, don't fix it. And they start with making sure that they're not making it worse, right? So for the first order of business is to put the process in place and the practice such that you make sure that to begin with, you're not introducing any new application security risks when you, from that point on, right? And you make sure that you preemptively keep your dependencies updated and you have a high level of hygiene in your software. And then gradually over time, you start reducing your security debt, right? And again, you can prioritize it. You can make sure to get very good ROI where you make incremental small investments that will make the initial largest decrease to your exposure. And then you can, because everyone has very limited resources, always, right? It's not something that you can really throw more money, time, and developers at. It's, you know, you have to find these engineers, you have to train them, you have to make sure they are allocated to this mission. That's always very hard. There's always some other competing business priority. And so I think that's the most effective way to approach it, is by first making sure you're not doing any additional harm, and only then starting to go back, and also making sure that you have a very clear prioritization of where your biggest exposure is and tackling that first. And then what you find is that relatively small investment of resources, you can start fixing, you know, 50, 60, 70% of your risk before you get stuck in the more complicated problems. Sorry, Arabella, for jumping here.
Oh, no, I think that what you said was probably better. Just saying that. No, I was going to make 2 points, which is one was just around prioritization. I mean, there's been lots written, said about this. Obviously, there's better ways of doing it. I think, to me, just becoming more involved in the application security space to sort of illuminating basic facts are one, not to sort of keep going on this dependency health updating train, but I think it's close to 80%, 85% of all kind of CVD sort of updates, they've already got a fix available before they're even published. So if people really do get up to date on dependency health, they really do narrow their attack surface. And this just isn't vendor speak. This is actual fact. There are other dependency health tools other than ours out there. So I think that's just a really basic thing that organizations can do to really up their game. That was sort of point one. And then point two is there is just a tremendous amount of noise of AppSec detection, and I know most open source, there's obviously lots of custom as well that we can talk about. We have a lot of expertise there. But I do think just some basic technologies, including reachability analysis that we do, right, which is, out of all those things that are found, how many actually will reach an application that will do something that you need to fix? It's still not as widely deployed as it should be. And so I think there are just some basics around reducing the noise of detection that many development engineering teams haven't quite figured out, and it just makes it so much more manual and so much more noisy than it ever has to be. So again, and this isn't just, there are other technologies and ours, out there, but if you map dependency health with reachability, I think you can become way more effective just with implementing those two types of capabilities. Is that too vendory? I don't mean it to be. It's actually because I think there are many of those tools out there from other people as well.
No, you're fine. Look, I will say both Rami and Arabella touched on something really important, which is, one, measurable prioritization. How am I going to prioritize? Pick something that actually matters to you as a business. For instance, does a vulnerable method actually, is it actually exposed to actual attack? Very self-evident. But to Rami's point on segmenting new and old, one of the most important pieces, and I think it's the part that the non-business people forget, engineers, is measure it. If you don't measure it, nobody cares. Rami is an exceptionally good CEO at this because he's a former engineer and he understands the value of cybersecurity because he runs a cybersecurity company. But a lot of them aren't. They see all those resources Rami was talking about and they want to know what they're getting for it. And if you don't have a measurement in place for your risk and you don't have a measurement in place for what you're prioritizing for, and you don't have a measurement in place for what you're fixing and remediating and reducing for risk, it's very, very hard to justify the spending, to ask for more, or to prove the value of your work. So metrics, that's all that boils down to.
I was going to bring that up too, because metrics there's sort of two sides of that coin. There's the vanity metrics. We blocked so many, blah, blah, blah. We found so many, blah, blah, blah. Well, so what? They may not have been even relevant to what we do or couldn't have been reachable, things like that. What are, when you're talking about, are we managing to the level of risk? Or what are some good metrics to help that we might be able to guide folks on what kind of things should we focus on to get valuable metrics that are meaningful to the technology team and the business?
Yeah, I'd love to hear I guess Rami and Jeff on this. I know a lot about what organizations are doing today, and then what good looks like, what better looks like, and what okay looks like. And to me, the two basic ones that almost all even mature AppSec program owners use are, one, just the amount of time it takes to remediate a critical I'll call it a critical issue. And, doing that can be a really long tail, particularly when it comes to transitive dependencies. And I mean tail as in TAIL, not TALE. So, still that is one. I think we did some research recently and, 271 days is average. And then if you do some best practices around, where you do your scanning, you can get that into, less than a month, which still isn't that long. But so one is just around measuring the time it takes to basically fix those criticals. And then the other one and I was surprised by how much it mattered, is really just what I would call developer adoption and all the code that you scan, what percentage of all code that you develop is scanned and fixed is even better. But that to me is just a very fundamental one, especially because it means, one, you've got visibility around all the code you create. So you actually know, which seems to be a huge factor for AppSec owners, and particularly around risk. You can't manage risk if you don't even know what your risk is or what code's being created. So just those two metrics alone seem to be the ones that drive many pretty sophisticated, I would say, organizations and AppSec programs. I'm not saying those are the best ones, but I think those that are the basics. I think that you can probably really fine tune it around. What you see some other organizations do is also look at their most business risky apps. Sometimes it can be as basic as the ones that have a lot of customer information, the ones that are most front facing, but then making sure they have a list of their most critical business risk applications and measuring those. But those are the three very basic ones. But I think once you improve those, you can have a step level change and reduction of risk. Yeah, and Jeff, Rami, I don't know if you've got any other ones that you'd like to point out.
All right, so I was actually going to talk about risk as its own metric, and it's difficult to get. It's not easy to put together, and it changes between organizations, and depends on what they do, what it is they need to protect, how sensitive the data they're holding is, how many different applications they have, where they are located, and so on. but you can eventually comprise some form of a risk scoring facility that does take into account not just, severity and age and the technical aspects of vulnerabilities, but also what Arabella talked about earlier, which is the business risk. Is it a heavily used application, or is it something that is only internally used by my employees? Is it something that is on a mobile or something that is an enterprise service? And also go even beyond that and look to see if there have been publicly reported exploits in the wild by other people, and gauge the level of harm there, and even take into account like secondary protection measures, like if you have a firewall rule that covers that specific issue and so on. So that's the level of investment you need to put in to build that risk score. But if you do have it, I think that's the best metric any company can have to be able to really gain visibility into their security level, security posture. And then immediately the next thing you need to track is the trend. Is my risk going up or down? And how fast is it going down if it is going down? And I think those are the two main things that at least I've heard about from board levels, right? You initially asked about what elevates this concern to the level of the board of the company. Then in boardrooms, that's what they mainly talk about. Can we assess the actual level of risk this poses to the company? And can we attest to the going down over time?
Yeah, and look, there's some great maturity models out there for your cybersecurity practices, and those are absolutely great and really useful if you're building a nuclear bomb or a pacemaker. But the fact of the matter is, most of us are not building a nuclear bomb or a pacemaker.
I hope we're building nuclear bombs, but anyway,
I mean,
some are, but
some people are. It could be somebody in the audience, but look, the maturity models and a lot of the kind of existing, let's just call it knowledge base of things like measuring risk are really geared towards incredibly high risk, but really not all that common use cases. And if you are in the audience making a pacemaker, I encourage you to make sure you're doing that. But for the rest of us, we need something that's actually manageable for the size and the risk profile of our actual applications. And a lot of it does start with some basic things to measure, like, okay, how many new vulnerabilities am I putting in? To Rami's point earlier, let's make sure we just stop putting bad things in. Like, do I even know what do I have in my software? Do I have an accurate SBOM? Arabella, you talked a little bit about time to remediate. Really common. Hey, if you're a federal government customer, you better be remediating everything in the known exploit vulnerability database within 2 weeks, because that's the rules. So it's kind of starting from there, the real basics. Arabella talked earlier about, if we gave report cards, a lot of people would be in a C. Yes, but it starts with giving yourself that report card. What are we doing? You can't improve it until you know you're a C, and then you can go and try to get to be a B, a B. But I do sort of encourage people to think a little bit smaller than those big maturity models. Again, unless you're, Northrop Grumman.
Well, as we start to get to, I guess, the last bit of our roundtable today, first I want to remind folks, when we're finished, when this closes out, you'll get a survey. We'd really appreciate your feedback about today's session and the conversation, the topics, what you thought was great, what you'd like to see, maybe what you didn't like. All of that feedback is very welcome. We would appreciate you filling out that survey. Also want to announce our 4 gift card winners of the $25 Amazon gift card. Our 4 winners are Julia C., Satish U., Helio A., and Josh G. The folks here on the team, Cody and others, will reach out to make sure that you get your gift certificate. So before, in just a moment, I'm going to ask each of our panelists kind of their parting thought, takeaway. from our conversation today. Also want to remind folks to please check out, this is an ongoing series that we're starting called AppSec Today, sponsored by Mend.io. And you'll be able to find that on techstrong.tv. So please check that out. We'll have some ongoing episodes, conversations, interviews, things like that coming up. So don't leave yet. We've still got a little bit more conversation to go. So I'm gonna let Rami end. How about we kind of go in reverse order of way we started? If you want to start first, Arabella, with your kind of summary thought.
I mean, I think the sort of overall summary that I have is how do we kind of raise the bar overall? So I think just from sort of my perspective, those two basics of like narrowing the attack surface with some basic kind of, I'll call it hygiene around dependency health information, I think could be really, really beneficial for many organizations. And I don't think it's as widespread from a security perspective as it should be. So just, what are the basics that you can do to sort of raise that level is one. And then two, just from an overall metric perspective, I think as Jeff said, and I mean, having a report card for yourself, for your organization, I think is, again, basic. But I think when you have that level of awareness, and then how do you want to improve and where do you want to get to, I think is the next. So my two would be like dependency health, and a report card for yourselves. Those would be the kind of two takeaways around how do you get, how do you really start to raise the bar for your organization, especially if you're not a really large, well-resourced enterprise organization with tons of staff and expertise. Those would be like the two basics.
All right, Jeff.
All right, so I have one really big one, which is I think education as a whole tends to lag a little bit in our industry, especially for the, let's call it, more senior stakeholders. And there's a lot of ways to handle that particular burden, and there's a lot of people out there talking about this like we are. But one of the really clean ways to do some education upwards in your organization is to send them this webinar and then go to the next one and send them the invite to the next one.
That's a great idea. Love that one too. All right, Rami.
I think if I could make a recommendation, is to try and not confuse effort with result. Because time and again, I see people, who say, yes, application security is very important to us. Here's everything we're doing. We bought these tools, we put these policies, we're doing all these efforts. But when you ask them, okay, so, were you able to reduce risk? Then all of a sudden they don't know, right? They're not tracking the right metric in that respect, or they're not watching the actual result of all their efforts. And are they really putting out more secure software, and not just, ticking a box saying, yes, we are doing application security, right? So just doing it is not useful. You have to make sure that you're actually getting the value and that you're actually reducing your risk, and so that you're not just spending all that time and effort and attention for nothing.
Fantastic. Well, two parting thoughts on my behalf. First, to build on your point, Rami, one of the ways to work on that is the why question. Why were we doing this? What were we trying to get from this? Okay, great. Let's make sure we're pointed in that direction to get that result. That's a good way of kind of testing. Are we going head in the right direction to get the end result that we wanted? I think the other is, and I'm just thinking about some of the comments, and I appreciate everybody commenting in the chat. And be sure and check out there in the handout sections before we go. There's some nice things there about Renovate, and also a open source risk report. Is that it isn't just about technology. It's really all three: people, process, and tech, right? And it's that combination. And maybe if you are in the kind of camp with some trepidation about, I'm not sure how to tackle this, it's not in my comfort zone yet, and I need some help getting there. there's people, process, and technology that can help you both get started as well as advance in your journey on that. So think about all of those, because rarely is it a technical solution. Rarely is it just a people or a cultural issue. It's kind of all those things working in concert with each other. So thank you, everybody, for attending. Rami, Arabella, Jeff, fantastic thoughts, ideas, commentary, and appreciate everyone who check in on chat and contributed that way too. Be sure and check out AppSec today at techstrong.tv, and be sure and visit, because the show is sponsored by Mend, be sure and visit mend.io at their website. Lots of great things. You can find that report, a lot of other fantastic resources. So thank you, everybody. Be safe, be well. We'll see you on our next roundtable or AppSec Today episode.